if it's easier for you, you can just, my channel should be like live right now. You can do it that way, but I will adjust the link on the Padlet. Weird that it looks different, but okay. The YouTube link has been updated to the new live stream. I just had to start a new one. Yeah, sorry about that. I had to pick up the phone. Sarah was calling me. We have like 45 minutes where she's watching both kids, and it might have been a lot, so that's why I did that. But we should be getting going here. Is anybody able to get to the new Yeah, so I just muted Zoom, so you should just be hearing me on YouTube side. Okay, I'm gonna take just a second here for anyone else to jump over. So I'm gonna try to repeat some of the things I was saying when I think I was being muted. So the big focus for these two landscapes, I think the demos that I'm going to do tonight are a good kind of refresher on working from broad to specific. Landscapes lend themselves well to that because they're bigger shapes. They're not figures where you kind of have this tendency to want to kind of break down all the parts. So really, in this painting, I'm seeing two shapes. I'm seeing a sky and I'm seeing a ground plane. And when you really kind of squint down, I'm distinguishing those shapes by their values, right? So the haystacks and the ground plane are roughly the same value. The sky is roughly the same value. So already I have, just something really simple to kind of go into this painting with. And that's just these two shapes, the sky and the ground plane. So I've distilled it down to the basic shape elements by value, pretty much. And now we can start to kind of think about where those values are related to each other. So again, we're going to think about values first and then temperature on top of that, color on top of that. So I'm seeing a pretty narrow value range, or at least the sky feels darker than a sky typically does, and maybe that's just the reference image of this. But I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna do this one with the open palette. So I'm not pre-mixing. I'm just gonna kind of jump into it and try to find my way. But I'm gonna start here with, actually, you know what? I wanted to start with the sky, so I don't know why I did that. I'm going to start by kind of assessing what the sky is value-wise. And then from there, I'm seeing it kind of warm up. I think I could probably go a little bit lighter with that. But here's what's happening as I'm going lighter. I'm getting cooler and I'm getting less chromatic. So as I'm going lighter, I want to bring some of that temperature back into it. Now I see more, in the sky I'm seeing more kind of red, and in the ground plane I'm seeing more of our yellow ochre, more yellow. But it's not strictly just red here, right? I grabbed some of that yellow ochre. So I'm really going to be strict. I'm kind of limiting myself or trying to kind of control myself in terms of the details here. I want it to be just those two shapes first. I want a sky plane. And you can see I'm kind of carving out and clarifying the shapes a little bit. Switching brushes. Now we're gonna just get this ground plane in. Now I'm using my palette first as the way I'm kind of checking, right? So value-wise, this is okay, but this is way more chromatic than it needs to be. It's more yellow. So I want to kind of get that actual color a little bit closer. So it's too yellow, it's too chromatic. I'm gonna adjust the chroma by adding in some black and some white, so graying it back is the phrase I would say, graying it back. So I'm in this particular case, I'm focusing on adjusting the chroma. I'm going to look over at my chart too, because we have the kind of golden yellow of this. We have that here, but as we get closer, as we start to desaturate it, I just want to make sure I'm kind of heading in the right direction. So I'm looking at my chart. The yellow is off camera right now, but that's mostly, I just want to see if I can get there with pure yellow and maybe a little white. But what I'm seeing is not quite. But again, the first thing I want to look at is just those values. Okay. So I'm going to make an adjustment here. I'm going to go a little bit lighter in the sky. So when I'm making like an edit like that, like what I'm doing right now is, it can be hard to kind of wrestle with a layer of wet paint, and how I'm trying to deal with that, especially because this is just a study, so I'm not too concerned about any sort of bad practices archivally speaking, though this is still would be okay to do. Is I'm really just loading my brush, really saturated, really well loaded brush, and then I'm just depositing the paint right on top. You can see I'm not using the kind of tips of my paintbrush. I'm really using the side, all the paint that's kind of getting closer and closer to the ferrule of the brush. The ferrule of the brush is the metal part. And I'm just kind of trying to put paint, just kind of pave another layer of paint down on top without touching it too much. So there I've made a slight value change. And I wanted to do that because I needed to desaturate this yellow and kind of bring it, but keep it in the roughly the value range that it was in there. And when I placed that there, those values were just a little too close. Not too concerned about proportions. I'm slowly editing the shapes into, each time I'm kind of working an area, I'm doing my best to get a little closer to what it should be. But at the end of the day, this is a color study. It's not like a drawing study or a proportional study. It's about getting those color notes. And when we were doing this with the monochromatic palette last term, I was able to kind of be a little more strict on what you could do, right? You could do like I needed to see 2 value studies and a 3 value study. And I've kind of opened it up this term, but dang it, I went for the wrong pile of paint. But I want you to still, if you're willing to, still kind of challenge yourself to do that, to just kind of, can I break this down into 2 shapes? Because that's the foundation of how this painting will develop, is it kind of develops from this place here. So even this would be like a decent value study. But from here, now that we have the broad things established, now you can go into each of these big shapes and try to find the next kind of biggest piece of information. So in the ground plane, I'm seeing a few dark accents. That's probably all I'm seeing. I'm squinting my eyes a lot. I don't think it's really worth distinguishing all the subtle shifts in that grass. But I think some of those dark notes in the haystacks are worth doing. And then in the sky, I'm seeing just a couple spots where there's a lighter light is coming through the clouds. So that's going to be it. But it's going to start here, big shapes, and then take that next biggest shape and break it into the next kind of size shapes. So really thinking of it as this shape block in, but we're just using more kind of articulated vocabulary to speak for the block in kind of development. Okay, so you can see in the palette work, there's already a value shift here. And I'm seeing the shadows in some of these spots, they feel warmer. So I am grabbing red. But what I'm trying to do first is see if the values of just red and yellow ochre, just mixing those two together, is going to get me dark enough value-wise before I have to grab black, because black is going to desaturate it, it's going to cool it off. I'm seeing these shadows as being pretty warm, so let's try that. You know, I think we could do a little black. I think it's a little too saturated. And then while I'm here, I'm seeing a little shape edit I can make. So I'm really trying to avoid getting in all the nuance, because now that my eyes are warming up to this image and getting more familiar with it, I'm seeing all these subtle value shifts, you know, from this dark accent to this one to the kind of dark accents here. I'm trying to just be as general as I can. You know, even this one. So I'm just using that same mixture for all of that. And the reason is you got to remind yourself you're not making a small painting, you're making this value study. And it's so hard to know really where to draw the line, especially when you're seeing those subtle shifts and you're feeling kind of good about, you know, and excited about going after them. So I'm gonna actually reset this brush. So I'm just taking my paper towel and I'm just pinching off as much as I can. Because what I see in the sky, the little kind of breaks in the cloud is really light. You know, so our sky is this value, so I need to be able to kind of push it this way. But there is a temperature there. It's not white. It's almost never, it's very rare that you find highlights, like super light lights and super dark darks that are pure white or pure black. There's almost always some temperature kind of injected in there. So let's see if I can recreate that mark I just tried to make there. This is just pure paint. This is a lot of paint too. It's thick. And I just tried to place that here and it didn't really come off of my brush. It's not laying on top of that. And I know that that's already has 2 layers on it. So it's a wet surface. And that's where the medium comes in handy, because the medium is going to create more flow of your mixture to come off of your brush. It's going to kind of encourage it to come off. So when I did that, that was a big indication for me of just get some medium so we can get that paint to flow off of the brush. So again, to summarize the kind of big ideas with this particular one is start with those big shapes and carve them out smaller and smaller. You can see I'm making those smaller shapes right on top of the big shape. I'm not kind of reserving the white canvas in this tiny little area for more shapes, which means I'm not kind of doing this detailed drawing from the beginning. You know, I'm kind of just looking at those big picture pieces of information, and all of the smaller bits become an afterthought, a secondary pass. So that would be that one. I'm gonna switch over now to example, what did I say, 5, I think? Yeah, example 5. So this one's tricky, and we'll see. I don't think I'm gonna get there, but I'm gonna try. I saw a lot of other people who have submitted work tried this one, and I think you all did a good job attempting to get the blueness of this. But for me, I think this one's a nice example to really manipulate what's around, manipulate the temperature information to try to make our gray, just our black and white, look as blue as possible, since this image is clearly quite blue. So first thing I'm gonna do here is reset my palette. It's more or less good. And I'm gonna give my brushes just a little rinse off in the linseed oil. You can see with that study, that first one, that it almost feels graphic or like kind of cut out shapes. And that's good. I want that to be the case for the studies. We'll get more, you know, we'll get more and more articulated with our shapes and our values and our colors and all of that as we keep going. But for these, yeah, it's just those big ideas. It's a nice refresher on the exercise of kind of distilling information down into the biggest components. I'm excited to see everyone kind of pushing that in your studies. I am seeing a lot of kind of subtlety, and that's great because that means you're really picking up on those shifts. But really simplifying is the hardest part. It's like seeing those shifts is awesome, but to be able to kind of control that and simplify it and put pieces in the right places is hard and worthy of, you know, you practicing. I think John Singer Sargent would be a great example of a master of simplification. You know, if you really zoom up on his paintings, there's not a lot going on there. It's very loose. It's very kind of well organized, simple shapes. So simplicity is truly a difficult thing to get. my little, I don't know, shorthand for doing landscapes, especially master copies of landscapes, is figure out where that horizon line is, you know, talking about breaking things down into the biggest shapes. Figure out where that horizon line is, and then you can start to place, you know, this little piece of land in relation to where that horizon line is, this little distant hillside in relation to that, the size of the cloud bank here, and then the top. In this case, it's pretty close to the halfway point. Looks like there's just a little bit more sky plane than there is ground plane, but okay, so this one is interesting because the thing that I think would be easiest to grab right now is the darks, right? So the darkest value here being this landmass. But I'm gonna try to, this paintbrush still has some warmth in it. I'm gonna grab a new brush. Because I really, I want this to feel cold. So what I'm gonna do instead here is I'm gonna take my black and white and get to where I roughly think that cloud bank value is. And I'll use that same value for the water. Squinting down, those things are pooling together. This might be a failed experiment, kind of like that Sargent one I did last time. That kind of cool, there was a coolness, an overall coolness to that whole painting, and I attempted to make that coolness read cool, and I don't think I was very successful. Okay, another very cool piece here would be this distant landmass. All right, so now I'm gonna try to get that darkest mass here, but for me to make the correct kind of temperature, so first thing would be getting that value in the right spot, but then the next thing is gonna be getting that temperature into the right spot. So So this might take a little searching, because the ground plane is warmer and darker. I'm going to start with this and potentially make some adjustments if I need to. And also, as I've mentioned about this one's kind of a booby trap one. It's one to kind of force us to just search for it and get as close as we can, and to kind of challenge you to come up with a strategy to try to find the correct temperature relationships. And I always say that you're not really painting until you get the whole canvas covered, and then you can start to make corrections. I always say that painting is really just fixing mistakes. So let me get those mistakes down first. All right, now I'm seeing the sky as being quite a bit lighter and warmer. Now, visually, I'm seeing like a little bit of kind of a greenness to that. But we'll see. For us to get something anywhere near green, we'd have to include black. But black is also going to cool it off. So I really want the coolest things, to be this bank of clouds and that distant landmass. So temperature-wise and value-wise, I want this to be these two to relate as close as we can to our reference. I'm going to try to take advantage of a few things happening in the clouds. There's some really light notes where you do almost lose a sense of temperature, to where it's almost going white. And then right around here, there's this really warm kind of chromatic warmth that I want to, I think if we can push the warmth of that, it's going to help make the grayness of these clouds feel cooler. All right, and then the last thing I'll try to do here is I'm gonna lighten this value just a little bit related to, and cool it off really relative to what I had in that first pass. So I'm just adding a little gray to it, a lighter value gray. So it's going to desaturate it, it's going to lighten it, and it's going to cool it off. So similar to what I was doing up here is I get those big shapes down, and then we can start to carve those big shapes into smaller pieces. Okay, and that's probably as far as I can get that to be blue. So the idea there is I'm warming this up and I'm warming that up beyond what I'm seeing in my reference so that I have the correct kind of temperature relationship between this and the blue there. So because we can't go super cool with our blues, that means we have to go really, really warm on the other end to give the right amount of kind of space between those two. Yeah, so I'm gonna probably call, well, before I do that, are there any questions or things that I can reiterate here before I end the live stream? Okay, I'm gonna end the live stream then. And I will talk to you on Zoom in just a sec.